What's going on, Illumineers, and welcome back to the madness. Today is a pretty exciting video because we're going into a super exciting month of the Maribel set champs. So today's video, we're just looking at what I think some of the best decks are for you to take and some honorable mentions. And whether you're just trying to do better than before, it's your first one, whether you're trying to get a Maribel, get top 8 or top 4, get a mat, whatever it is, this is just going to showcase some really good decks going into the month ahead. Okay, the big idea here is we'll talk about what some of the pros and cons of each deck are, and the list isn't going to be a 1 through 5. There's no particular order, just a look at some of the better decks. And with that, I hope you guys like the content. Don't forget, drop a like, a subscribe, comment, whatever it may be. But let's jump into it. So, our first one we got is Sailors. Let's get the laser pointer going. We got Sailors Red Blue. And remember, this is no particular order. This is just some decks that I believe are going to be really good into set champs. And of course, I am a big red blue believer. When half your deck is removal, half your deck is draw, you're just going to be able to do some great things. You got one of the best draw engines in the game with Flaversham. You got little Sizus to answer your hyper aggro, but ice blocks to answer other things. And then that turn 6 for the big Sizu to get some huge tempo. And it's just red blue, right? Now, one thing, if you're not super experienced with red blue, like you want to be doing a little bit more early game instead of just inking constantly to get to the top end, maybe you can up your brawls and cut somewhere else. And that could be one thing you could do. If you're worried about losing Tippo with Hideaway, then you could put in Cusco's. With that being said, there's a reason Sailor's running Hideaways and Brawls, but they are options as well. Again, one thing to keep in mind when you're playing Red Blue, you have to understand that it is more important for you to get to 7 or 8 ink than it is for you to be holding on to cards that you could potentially use later on. This deck is all about getting to that high inks because you have some of the best top. I would wager that you have the best top decks in the game because you have your big Caesars, your Tamatoas to get more draw, your Flavershams, your Dragons. You just have phenomenal top decks. Almost every card in here, you're looking forward to top decking. So you need to be able to have the ink to do it, though. It doesn't matter if you have a big Sizu and a B prep in your hand. If you're stuck on 4 or 5 ink because you didn't want to ink stuff, because you didn't want to fishbone quill stuff, you can't use it anyways. So you might as well just fishbone quill the B prep or the big Sisu, and so that way when you top deck or you Flaversham into these, you can play them later on. So just make sure when you're playing this, you're getting comfortable with having a small hand, you're getting comfortable with the mulligan. But just a really strong deck it's weaker into hyper aggro, but that's really only it's only bad matchup anymore. It's just a really strong, effective deck, and you just have to get comfortable with how you play red blue. But yeah, Sailor, way to do it, man. Way to keep this deck going. The next one I wanted to highlight was Arta. He's got of course, his green purple, and there's a bunch of different ways you can run this list, right? You've all seen that by now. We've got Earl's version that's more of a toolbox version. And there may be a good argument to run a more toolbox version in your local set champs because you know what everyone's going to be running generally. So you can hard mulligan for those toolbox options a little bit better. But this version is more consistent in my opinion because you're not you're not if you're playing the correct way and not assuming you know what everyone's playing, just because it's set chance and you've seen them play before, then you're just getting more consistent stuff. All right, you got your Clarabelles. This helps with item removal later on. You got your Curse Merfolks and your Sir Hisses. So just you're going and you're laying down and getting early lore. Um, they have to take it out, so maybe they lose a card when they take that out unless they can sing it away. But then, of course, your Ursula is your draw package with Clarabelle and um, rabbits and friends. And then you're welcome. You lay down a Clarabelle, you're welcome one of their creatures, so then you get to draw at least 2 cards. Just a really effective package. Of course, like I said, you could drop the Merfolks to go something like Chernobog's, but Arta, he's a big fan of just the Cursed Merfolk, so you can just start questing and getting that early lore in, because this has a good matchup into red blue, either version, but why not make it better, right? And that's what Curse Merfolk is doing. It's a strong card that is difficult for people to remove because they don't want to sacrifice a card. So, and that makes it even better when you're on the draw because they're already down a card, whereas you're up that card because you got to draw on your first turn. So just a good list. Green purple is a reliable way to go. It's good into the meta, and it's just tempo. And tempo always, not always, but it just feels good to play when you're just doing something every single turn. So moving on, we got some Steel Song. There's a bunch of different variations of Steel Song that I could have highlighted. I just did a video on Steel Song, so I won't go too deep into it, but I just decided to highlight Boomy's version, this aggro version. It's something that I imagine we're going to be seeing a lot of metas will be seeing a lot of red blue, and this version is just really, really, really good into red blue. And you're just doing a more aggro line. Like I said in the previous video when I highlighted all the steel song lists, you got your daisies, you got your Smees, your piglets, binges for their fishbone. Lawrence is just such an MVP in this meta. You got being a 4/4 and then a great Rapunzel target. So if you want to hear more about it, I recommend you go watch my last video. It'll be in the description, and we go a little bit more in depth in this, and then we talk about some tech options if you wanted to cut the Kitas, because that's one thing that Boomy did talk about. But Steel Song still alive and well. This is just one variation that you could run if you wanted to go the more aggro route for faster games. So next up, we got Harlan's Sweets Blue Steel list. I decided to highlight this one because, we had Jonathan that just did really good at the Vegas, and then we had another, he got fifth, I believe, and there was another gentleman that I think did top 16 or top 32 at Vegas with his blue steel. But Harlan, I just highlighted him because, he's a good blue steel player. He loses face sometimes, but always comes back because he loves the deck. And I do like the Captain Hook variant because it just it gives you something to do turn one, especially I think it's a little bit safer for newer blue steel players to play Captain Hook. Because it gives you some of that early tempo. So between Captain Hook and Argus and Smees, you just have the ability to have more of an early board. And the early game, in my opinion, is oftentimes when most blue steel players have the hardest time because they just don't you're not red blue in the sense that you're ramping everything away, but you still need to ramp. This just gives you early tempo, lets you fight the board really well. The Captain Hook being a challenger too, and then you play Captain Hook, and then you play a Smee, and your Smee's not losing a health because you have a captain on the field. Your Argus is challenging the Flynn's, so they can't get their +3. So Blue Steel just it's a good I was hesitant throwing it in my top five because it is a harder deck to pilot, much like Red Blue. But where Zan just won with Green Steel, Blue Steel is really good into that. So if you have a lot of people in your local meta that are just net decking the Green Steel discard, then your Blue Steel is going to be really effective into it. With your Cogsworths, your Aerials, with Ward. So the dream, right, is you can go ahead and maybe you go Captain Hook into a Smee, into a Mickey, and then you lay down a Cogsworth, and then you lay down an Aerial. At some point, you've even just one item, your Aerial is already questing for 5. Lucky Dime, now you're getting 10 per turn. All these different options. And then, of course, with Blue Steel, you have your Tinkerbells and your Grab Your Swords to deal with their Prince Johns and their Muses and things like that. But just another really effective deck. I'd say it's 50-50 into Steel Song. It it's not as I think red blue is favored is the going rate, but with this early package, then you definitely where your Smees aren't losing health each turn, you have the ability to really get low to the ground and really beat them up with these Smees. And then, of course, you have your Peets and the Tinkerbells that are hard to deal with. You can air if you get Aerial down and you can go Chinpo into Aerial, then your Aerial is really hard to get rid of. So you might be able to just rush them out with Aerials. So a lot of options, really good deck, but understand that this deck is not something you can pick up never playing before and expect to do really well. There's a lot of minute plays. Do I ramp? Do I go aggro with the Smees and stuff? When's the right time to use a whole new world? Any deck that runs a whole new world is going to have some interesting plays with that. So just a lot of options, but really good. I recommend checking out Harlan's channel because he just did an interview with Jonathan where he talks about, his deck and everything, and Harlan has a lot of good breakdowns for Blue Steel. But just one variation. And then our last one for the top five, it might come as a surprise to people, but this is JDRR's. He's really popular on the 20 Discord. He's the leader of our cow farm team and Purple Steel. And I never played Purple Steel until recently, and I've got to admit, this deck is just really effective at what it does. And it does nothing what it does really great is you're just playing a character every turn. But this deck has no high roll potential. You're not doing anything fancy. You're legitimately just going 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop, 4 drop, and that's it. But it's really good right now in this meta. If your green steel is popular or green purple is popular, you have smashes, so your smash isn't ripped with the 2 cost Ursula, so you can answer their 3 cost Ursula. You can blow up pretty much anything you want with 3 damage from Smash. You play Rabbit, and then you can sing Zeus to gain back a bunch of tempo, protect your Smees that are on the field. Lawrence is just a 4/4 that's really hard to deal with. The same with your Chinpos and your Tinkerbells. And then, of course, you've got Castles. So understand that this deck isn't doing, like I said, it's not doing anything fancy. It is just a 100% tempo deck. I'm going to lay something down every turn. I'm going to put Chinpo in bodyguard to protect my stuff. And then in the end, I'm going to lay down goats and win the game. It's just it's a really relaxed deck to tempo that's really, really good into the current meta. So I definitely urge you to give it a try. There's a lot of arguments about the Chin Pose. I think he is an MVP for this deck that you have to keep. The only thing that there's a possibility you could change is maybe you go down to 3 Elsas to go for a 4th Lawrence, just because I'm a huge fan of Lawrence, but there's different variations that you could try if you wanted to try library, but I prefer castles. So when they B prep you, then you can just lay down a castle and keep tempo alive that way. But just a really strong deck, not super expensive, that I think you guys would do really well to think about using. So, honorable mentions. You guys have noticed there's some very particular decks that I didn't mention, and let me tell you why. So the first one is Zan's deck that he took first with. There's a couple big reasons I did not include this in the top 5. A, it's really, really difficult to pilot really effectively. And B, it requires time. So this deck is good into best of 2 because you have less games. But in best of 3, if you're going into game 3 with this deck, you're most likely going to go to turns. And once you go to turns, that's going to maybe it makes you play a little bit suboptimally because you're running out of time. But going to turns is just not where you want to be. This deck moves very slowly. You're not questing for a whole lot. You play Beast, right? But you're not questing with Beast because you want the draw power out of Beast, and you're not questing with these Prince Johns. So when you're looking at 15, 20 turn games of before you get to 20 lore, the other part, like I said, part one is it's difficult to pilot. You have to have a full understanding of how Lorcana works with the bag. And other games they have the idea of first in, first down, or you do this, so then it triggers this, so then it triggers this, and so then it resolves this. Lorcana doesn't work like that. And I think a really good example of this, and I think it happened in the live stream, and I'll try and illustrate this without butchering it, is that on the live stream in game 1 and 2, or a good example of the bag is, let's say your opponent has 2 exerted Diablos. On your side of the field, you have a Prince John, you have a Muses, and you decide to hard cast We Don't Talk About Bruno on one of their Diablos. So someone that doesn't understand the bag very well might hardcast We Don't Talk About Bruno and then have them resolve We Don't Talk About Bruno. So then the Diablo goes into their hand, they discard a card, and you draw a card because of Prince John. Well, that was wrong because their other exerted Diablo means that they can also draw a card now. So what you do instead is We Don't Talk About Bruno, you hardcast We Don't Talk About Bruno on their Diablo. Before resolving that, you use Muse's effect to then bounce their other Diablo. And then after that, you resolve We Don't Talk About Bruno to make them discard a card, and then you draw with your Prince John. So you're pulling things out of the bag very particularly so you can maximize your benefit, and that way they don't get their benefit. And you just have to, these cards, you have to understand how that works. When you're playing with Prince John and Muses, the bag is very important. So you have to have an understanding of that. And you have to be able to explain it to your opponent if they don't. So those are the two big reasons why I didn't have this in top 5 is A, it's difficult to pilot effectively, and B, it requires a lot of time, and you don't want to go to game 3 and then you guys draw because you ran out of time. But it is a really effective deck. If you go turn 1 Diablo, turn 2 Hidden Cove, turn 3 you shift Diablo and put it on Hidden Cove, and you let the Storm Rage on, or if you had the Prince John as well and then sing Let the Storm Rage on, like that is super effective. But you could also, you could there's just so many different plays that you have the ability to do. What I just mentioned wouldn't work because you don't have enough ink yet, but you get the idea. There's so many different lines with this deck to make it really effective. But if you haven't played it yet, if you want to play it for set champs, I would wait until the later end of the month where you have time to get practice in with this deck. The next one we have on the list is also green. I highlight this is the green, the lemon lime discard. I highlighted. I'm going to butcher his name. Kawa from Podcana. He just won the first set champs with over in London. It was the content creator set champs, and he used hit this deck here. Um, Boy, do I hate playing against this deck. What this deck does, it does effectively. You're just looking at emptying your opponent's hand, and then you have one of the best removals in the game, in my opinion, of Under the Sea. So again, though, one thing to keep in mind with this deck is you're not winning quickly, okay? If your opponent doesn't concede because they're just angry about no hand, then there's a good chance you'll go to turns, and then you'll end up drawing if you go to game 3. But because you're just questing very slowly. Now, Cricky does help with that, questing for 3, but understand that you're questing very slowly with this deck. You're just trying to empty their hand and protect yourself, and that's kind of the name of the game. But it's just discard. That's all it is. You're playing cards. You're making them discard. You're hoping that they don't top deck a B prep. That's really all there is going on with this. So it is a very high rolly deck. So do keep that in mind. You may lose just because you didn't have the high roll. You didn't have the dream play, and that's one of the reasons this deck isn't. You don't see a whole lot of it because it requires quite a bit of RNG to play effectively. But moving on, I think we got 3 more. We got 3 more in our honorable mentions. But we have Jonathan Rosario. He took this to Vegas. He placed top 32, I think, with it. It may have just been top 64. I say that very loosely. But it's just blurple, okay? You're ramping up super high, so then you can do crazy shenanigans with your bounce characters. You play a Hades, you bounce your Hades. That way you can keep playing Hades over and over again. You play a rabbit, you Yzma your rabbit, so you draw 3 cards. You play an Elsa and you bounce your Elsa. Now, there's tons of different ways you can play this, so just always keep that in mind. Like nothing's set in stone. So, for example, if you have the ink, maybe you play an Elsa and you lock down 2 of their characters. Uh, One thing you can do then is next turn maybe you have to shift Elsa for whatever reason. So you shift Elsa for 6, and then you're able to bounce. You use a crab or a fox and bounce them both back to your hand after you quest, of course, for 3, and then now you can Elsa lock them again. We got the libraries. I'm a big fan of Castle or even both, but the libraries are really helping you to get that card draw even more. And then this one right here is really heavily teched into Steel Song with the Madam Mim, where really anything steel. Madam Mim Elephant is really hard to deal with, and then you got the Bell to deal with things like Diablo. And then if they're whatever, now you can just start moving damage with Bell. I've never been a big fan of the Cogsworth personally, but you can do some crazy, wacky stuff with Cogsworth, especially with Bell on the field. Um, so a really effective deck. I'm a big fan of Blurple. I still don't know what I'll play at my set champs because I really like Blurple, but we will see. We got Hyper Aggro. We couldn't do a video without it. It it is better in best of 3 than best of 2, right? Because it's so much better on the draw. So if you can win the dice roll, there's a good chance you just win. And it not much to say. Yeah, you're looking for at least 3 ink. You play out cards. You're hoping for a bunch of daisies. And then you got Simba to protect your piglets and stuff. And then you got even more bodyguard. Baloo is a free 2 lore. You got your goats. You've got your gathering knowledge. One thing to look at though is there's no foxes or snakes in this list. Personally, I think that's the way to go. I do prefer that route, but that's me. But I also don't play hyper aggro. But you're just trying to really beat people turn 4, turn 5, and then you Amethyst Chromacon, so you can play 2 characters down per turn. Not much to say other than I'm gonna try and beat you really, really, really fast. And then the final list before advice, we're 22 minutes, is Forbidden Mountains. They got this from Wonderland, and then they kind of tweaked it for them. This is just another aggro list where you're trying to play a bunch of characters. You have your docks to refill your hand, library to refill your hand, and then bosses on the roll. You're playing it to essentially find better cards, right? And it gains you 1 lore, gathering knowledge, goats. Not a lot to say. I will link Forbidden Mountains video on this deck where they go pretty in depth into it and talk about some different variations you could play. But another good aggro deck that you could try. So finally, overall advice. You know, the first one is take a snack. Take a snack, whether it's a Slim Jim, it's some peanuts. I'm a big fan of. I should have brought them in here, but I'm a big fan of the Snack and Go tuna packets. It has, the little thing, the little package of tuna, and then the crackers. It's like 100 calories, and it works for me, and that's what I really like because it's really light and it's really fast, and it fits in my bag. So I'll take 2 of those and I'll be good. Take your own water bottle so you're not constantly having to, because you're at a local game store and they might have their own water, but if there's a line and then your game starts, now you don't get water. So take your own water bottle, fill it up in the bathroom or whatnot, and drink some tap water. It'll be okay. But stay hydrated. Stay full on good food. If you're using your lunch or you're using your breaks to go to McDonald's and stuff, you that's not good. All right. You're First off, your hands are going to get super messy while you're handling your cards and everything. But even more importantly, like it's just not healthy. Okay. Your brain will operate better on more healthy food. And of course, tuna packets aren't the most healthiest thing in the world, but it's way more healthy than all the crap that you can get at McDonald's or Burger King or any of those places that you might find next door, Taco Bell. So just try and take something a little bit healthier and that's something that's easy, um, and you will thank yourself later. The next one, whether it's your first or not, whether it's a new store, just relax, okay? Relax, breathe, whatever happens, happens, and you've practiced to get there. Now you're there. Just play the game. The biggest thing after each game, or sorry, after each match, step away from the table. Get your stuff together. Step outside, walk around the store, whatever it may be. Just step away, especially if you lost and you feel like you lost to luck or RNG, whatever it may be. Step away and breathe. Okay, it is so important that you understand that you need to reset your mental space. Okay, because if you go into your next match all worked up, you're going to make mistakes because you're more worked up. Maybe you mulligan differently because you're upset about something that happened last game. Step away, just breathe, have a tuna packet. It's going to be okay. I promise. Just step away, okay? And then finally, you all these decks are great decks. I didn't mention other decks. There's Ruby Fossa, there's Steel Fossa, there's Blue Green Cow, there's all these other decks. The point is, the best deck is the one you're most comfortable with. Do not switch right before a set champs to a deck that you think is going to be really good that you've never played or that you've played very, very little of. Because what's going to happen is if you lose, you're just going to be upset with yourself because you're gonna wonder, well, would I have won if I had my other deck? And then you're gonna beat yourself up the rest of the day. The other thing is you're gonna start questioning every move that you make. So instead of playing a deck you're confident in where you can make moves confidently, now you're playing a new deck. You're okay, I could do this, but next turn I want to do this. So is it better if I do? No, like play the deck that you're most comfortable with, at least to start. Get your improvement out of the way, get your first Maribel, whatever it is, and then play the decks that you're not as comfortable with. Play the decks that you want to see if you can do just as well with. But don't, if it's your only one, don't go into your only set champs with a brand new deck because you're only going to be really upset with yourself if you don't do well. You're just gonna, man, I wish I would have played that other deck. Why did I switch? Just because it won a DLC, just because it has the best stats for winning, doesn't mean it's going to be good. Okay, if you don't enjoy playing it, that's going to play a factor as well. So if you've always played Ruby Fossa and people call that a tier 2 deck or whatever, who cares? Continue to play Ruby Fossa because you know the lines of that deck. All right. With that being said, everyone, one of these days I'll have a shorter video, but that's all I have. The the big thing here, just have fun, guys. I know everybody says that, but it's so important to remember that you're just trying to have fun, okay? So we'll end with this. If you liked the video, again, don't forget like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you guys think. If you have questions, hit me up on Discord. I'm going to try and post all the links in the description as well. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, we're staying happy and healthy, all right? Whether you're working on mental health, physical health, or both, I promise you that happiness will follow if you're working on them. Until next time, I hope I see you around. I'm out.